Imagine this for a moment. You are standing inside the Colosseum. 50,000 voices roar like thunder. The ground trembles beneath your feet. Blood stains the sand. Steel clashes against steel. And then, silence. The gates open. A single man steps forward. He is not a slave. He is not a trained warrior fighting for survival. He is not a man seeking freedom. He is the most powerful man in the world. The Emperor of Rome, crowned in gold, draped in purple, son of a philosopher king. And yet, he has chosen the sword. This is not a legend. This is not a myth. This is history at its most disturbing, because while Rome expected wisdom, Commodus chose spectacle. While the Senate prayed for stability, he craved applause. While the empire begged for leadership, he demanded worship. He did not rule Rome from the throne. He ruled it from the arena. Each time he raised his sword, Rome held its breath, not because he was brave, but because the fate of the empire rested on the whims of a man intoxicated by blood and glory. Was he a fearless warrior, or a madman playing hero while Rome burned behind him? He fought gladiators, but only the ones who were told to lose. He killed beasts, while the crowd was forced to cheer or die. He called himself Hercules reborn, and demanded to be worshipped as a god. And with every battle, the line between emperor and monster began to disappear. This is the story of a ruler who turned power into theater, of a prince who became a performer, of an empire that watched in horror and applauded anyway. Because when Commodus entered the arena, Rome wasn't just watching a fight. Rome was watching its own downfall begin. What you are about to hear is not the story Rome wanted remembered. It is the story Rome tried to forget, because Commodus was not supposed to be this way. He was born into greatness, the son of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, a ruler remembered for wisdom, restraint, and duty. Rome believed the future was safe. The empire believed it was protected by legacy itself. A golden age was expected to continue uninterrupted. But history does not care about expectations. When Commodus took the throne, something ancient and dangerous awoke inside him. Not the burden of leadership, but the hunger for attention. Not the weight of responsibility, but the thrill of domination. He did not want to govern men. He wanted them to watch him. Rome was no longer an empire to be ruled. It became a stage, and Commodus was determined to be the star. While enemies gathered at the borders and corruption festered within the Senate, the emperor obsessed over something else entirely: applause, cheers, adoration. He wanted Rome to love him not as a ruler, but as a living legend. So he did the unthinkable. He stepped into the arena. Where emperors once commanded legions, Commodus wielded a sword. Where law once ruled, spectacle took its place. Where Rome demanded strength, it received madness disguised as courage. This was not bravery. This was performance. And yet, no one could stop him. Because when the emperor demands worship, silence becomes survival. When the ruler holds the blade, truth becomes dangerous. And when the crowd cheers loudly enough, even insanity feels like destiny. This is not just the story of one man's descent. It is the story of an empire that clapped as it collapsed, of power corrupted by vanity, of Rome's greatest stage becoming the mirror of its own decay. And now, we step into the arena. Commodus did not rise from chaos. He rose from order. From the moment he was born, Rome believed he was destined for greatness. He was not a general who seized power by force. He was not a politician who manipulated his way to the top. Commodus was something far more dangerous, a man who inherited absolute power without ever having to earn it. His father, Marcus Aurelius, was everything Rome admired: a philosopher, a stoic, a ruler who slept in military tents and carried the weight of the empire like a moral burden. To the Roman world, Marcus Aurelius was proof that power and virtue could coexist, and Commodus was supposed to be his continuation. From a young age, Commodus was groomed for rule. He traveled with his father on campaigns. He witnessed the discipline of the legions. He watched Rome's enemies fall before imperial authority. But while Marcus Aurelius saw duty, Commodus saw something else. He saw attention. He saw the way crowds gathered when the emperor appeared. He saw the fear in the eyes of senators. He saw how life and death bent to a single command. And slowly, quietly, something twisted inside him. Unlike his father, Commodus hated restraint. He despised philosophy. He found governance boring, tedious beneath him. Sitting in councils, listening to advisors, debating laws. To Commodus, this was weakness disguised as wisdom. What excited him was the raw, visceral display of power. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 after Christ, Rome mourned, but it also hoped. Commodus was young, energetic, and unchallenged. For the first time in generations, Rome had an emperor who was the direct biological son of his predecessor. Stability seemed guaranteed. At first, things appeared calm. Commodus let the Senate believe they still mattered. He signed decrees. He attended ceremonies. He smiled. But behind the scenes, he was already withdrawing from responsibility. Decisions were handed to favorites. Corruption flourished. The machinery of empire kept moving. But the man at the center no longer cared how it worked. What he cared about was being seen. He surrounded himself with flatterers instead of thinkers, with performers instead of generals, with men who praised his strength, his beauty, his supposed divine nature. And then the transformation began. Commodus stopped seeing himself as a ruler. He began seeing himself as a hero. Not a Roman hero of discipline and sacrifice, but a mythic one. A figure larger than reality. A living god who deserved admiration, fear, and worship. Rome had placed a crown on his head, but Commodus wanted something louder than loyalty. He wanted applause. And that desire would drag the empire toward the arena, whether Rome wanted it or not. When Marcus Aurelius died, he left behind more than a throne. He left a shadow too large for his son to escape. Rome compared everything Commodus did to what his father would have done. Every decision, every silence, every indulgence was measured against a memory of discipline and wisdom. And Commodus felt it, not as guidance, but as humiliation. He did not want to live up to his father. He wanted to replace him. So Commodus did something subtle at first. He stopped presenting himself as a man. Slowly, deliberately, he began presenting himself as something greater. Statues of the emperor began to change. The familiar, dignified Roman image disappeared. In its place appeared a new figure, muscular, idealized, divine. Commodus portrayed himself as Hercules reborn, the son of Jupiter, the living embodiment of strength, and Rome was forced to accept it. He renamed months after himself. He renamed Rome itself, calling it Colonia Commodiana. He demanded that senators address him not as emperor but as a god walking among mortals. Temples were rededicated, coins were restamped. Reality was reshaped around his ego. But this was not enough, because gods are not admired in silence. They are worshipped in spectacle. Behind the palace walls, Commodus had found his true obsession, the gladiatorial games. What began as fascination turned into fixation. He trained obsessively. He sparred daily. He surrounded himself with fighters, trainers, and arena masters. To him, the Colosseum was not entertainment. It was proof. Proof that he was strong. Proof that he was feared. Proof that the people needed him. And then he crossed a line no Roman emperor before him had dared to cross. He entered the arena. At first, it was private, secret fights, controlled settings, opponents who knew they must fall. Commodus fought with blunted weapons against wounded or weakened enemies. Victory was guaranteed and carefully staged. But the illusion worked. When word spread, Rome was stunned. Some were horrified. Others were mesmerized. An emperor who fought like a gladiator. A ruler who bled with the people. To the masses, it felt revolutionary. To the Senate, it felt like a nightmare. Because every time Commodus stepped into the sand, Rome was forced to cheer. Not because he deserved it, but because refusing meant death. Applause became obedience. Fear became loyalty. And with each fight, Commodus grew bolder. He killed animals by the hundreds. He staged battles where he alone stood victorious. He demanded payment for his performances, draining the treasury to reward himself. The empire was no longer governed by law or tradition. It was ruled by spectacle and ego. Rome had once conquered the world through discipline. Now it was being held hostage by a man addicted to applause. And the more Rome clapped, the more dangerous Commodus became. The moment Commodus made his battles public, Rome crossed a point of no return. The Colosseum, once a place meant to distract the masses, became the center of imperial power. Politics no longer unfolded in the Senate. Decisions were no longer shaped by law. Rome's fate was now decided on blood-soaked sand. Every appearance of the emperor followed a ritual. Trumpets sounded, the crowd rose, the gates opened, and there he was, Commodus, dressed not as a ruler but as a warrior god. Muscles oiled, weapons gleaming, a living symbol of strength, carefully crafted to inspire awe. But behind the spectacle was a lie. Commodus never fought as a real gladiator. His opponents were selected in advance. Many were wounded, some were unarmed. Others were ordered to submit at the first sign of danger. Victory was scripted. Death was optional and only for those beneath him. Yet the illusion was powerful. To the common people, Commodus looked fearless. He killed lions with arrows. He slaughtered exotic beasts imported from across the empire. He stood alone against dozens of enemies who conveniently fell before him. Each kill was followed by deafening applause. Applause demanded under threat of execution. Rome was cheering not because it believed. Rome was cheering because it was terrified. The emperor began to appear almost daily. He treated the games not as ceremonies, but as performances. He kept score. He counted victories. He demanded that official records list his triumphs, alongside those of legendary generals. And then came the insult that shattered Rome's dignity. Commodus declared himself the greatest gladiator in history. He ordered the state treasury to pay him enormous sums for every appearance, as if Rome itself were hiring him for entertainment. Millions were drained from public funds to reward the emperor for playing hero. Meanwhile, the empire suffered. Borders weakened. Corruption exploded. Military discipline collapsed. Senators were executed on a whim. Trusted advisors vanished overnight. Anyone who questioned Commodus's behavior was accused of treason, or worse, mocked publicly before being erased. Fear ruled every layer of society. Inside the palace, paranoia spread like poison. Commodus trusted no one. He believed assassins lurked everywhere. Friends became suspects, servants became spies. He slept with weapons near his bed. He changed guards constantly. His madness fed on itself. And still, he kept fighting, because the arena was the only place where he felt alive. There, the crowd was forced to love him. There, no one could contradict him. There, reality bent to his fantasy. But power built on illusion always collapses violently. The more Commodus retreated into spectacle, the more enemies he created, quietly, patiently, in the shadows. Men and women who understood one truth above all others. As long as Commodus lived, Rome would bleed. And somewhere within the palace walls, a decision was forming. The Emperor Gladiator had turned the empire into his personal stage. Now the final act was being prepared. By the final years of his reign, Commodus no longer ruled Rome. He haunted it. The palace, once a place of ceremony and order, had become a cage of suspicion. Corridors echoed with whispers. Servants disappeared without explanation. Guards were replaced overnight. No one knew who would still be alive by morning. Not senators, not generals, not even those closest to the emperor. Commodus trusted no one because he understood something terrifyingly well. He had made too many enemies to count. Every execution had created a brother seeking revenge. Every humiliation had forged silent hatred. Every forced cheer in the arena had planted resentment deep inside Rome's heart, and the emperor felt it. He slept little. When he did, a sword lay within reach. He imagined plots everywhere, in shadows, in laughter, in silence. His paranoia fed his cruelty, and his cruelty fed his paranoia, a perfect cycle of fear. The Senate was powerless. Reduced to trembling spectators, they no longer debated policy. They waited to be spared, waited to be accused, waited to die. Real authority now rested with a small circle inside the palace. Advisors, mistresses, bodyguards, and officials who survived not by loyalty, but by usefulness. Among them was Marcia, the woman closest to the emperor. She knew his moods, his fears, his secrets. She had watched men rise and fall with a single whisper in his ear. And she knew something else. Commodus was spiraling. He spoke openly of purges. He kept lists, names of people he planned to kill, senators, former allies, even members of his own inner circle. Death was no longer political. It was personal. Then came the moment that sealed his fate. Commodus announced plans for the new year. He would abandon the traditional role of emperor entirely. He would appear publicly not as ruler, but as gladiator. He would march through Rome wearing armor, carrying a club like Hercules, declaring himself the savior and rebuilder of the empire. And worse, he intended to begin the year by executing his enemies. That list was real, and Marcia's name was on it. Fear turns into clarity very quickly. Together with Latus and Eclectus, Marcia understood there was only one option left. There would be no trial, no exile, no peaceful removal. The Emperor Gladiator could not be reasoned with. He could only be stopped, quietly, permanently. The plan was simple: poison first, silence later. On the night of December 31st, 192 after Christ, Commodus dined as usual, confident, arrogant, untouchable. Marcia offered him wine, laced with poison. He drank. At first, nothing happened. Then his body rebelled. But Commodus was strong. His body, hardened by training, fought back. He vomited the poison. He staggered. He lived. And in that moment, everyone inside the palace understood a horrifying truth. If Commodus survived the night, no one else would survive the morning. So they made one final decision. They summoned a man who understood violence better than anyone else. A wrestler, The arena had been Commodus's stage. Now it would become his grave. The man who entered the emperor's chambers was named Narcissus. He was not a senator, not a general, not a politician. He was a fighter, chosen for one reason only. He knew how to kill with his hands. Inside the palace, Commodus lay weak but furious. The poison had failed, but it had terrified him. His body trembled with rage. He knew someone had betrayed him, and he intended to make Rome drown in blood by dawn. But the dawn would never come. Narcissus approached quietly. The emperor, barely conscious, recognized him. A man from the training halls, someone he trusted, someone strong. That trust lasted only seconds. Narcissus wrapped his arms around Commodus's throat. The emperor struggled. Even poisoned, even weakened, Commodus was powerful. He clawed, he kicked, he fought like a man who had lived for violence his entire life. For a moment, it seemed impossible. The ruler who had slain beasts and humiliated men in the arena refused to die quietly. But this was no performance. There was no crowd, no applause, no script, only silence and fear. Narcissus tightened his grip. Minutes passed. The god of Rome choked on his own breath. The Hercules reborn thrashed helplessly. The emperor who demanded worship died like any other man, terrified and alone. On December 31st, 192 after Christ, Commodus was dead, and Rome exhaled. No announcement echoed through the streets. No public mourning followed. The Senate did not weep. The people did not riot. Instead, there was relief. Quiet, cautious relief. Statues were torn down. His name was erased. His titles revoked. The man who had demanded to be remembered as divine was condemned to silence. The empire survived, but it was forever changed. Commodus had proven something Rome never wanted to learn. Absolute power does not always create tyrants with vision. Sometimes it creates performers drunk on applause, men who mistake fear for love, madness for strength. The Colosseum returned to spectacle. The throne returned to politics, but the damage lingered, because Rome had watched its emperor fight for entertainment and had cheered, even when it knew it was wrong. And that perhaps was Commodus's greatest legacy. Not his madness, not his cruelty, but the moment Rome realized that its greatest enemy was not at the borders. It was wearing a crown. When the sun rose over Rome on the first day of the new year, the empire felt different. There was no emperor waiting to be worshipped, no god demanding applause, no gladiator king preparing for another performance. For the first time in 12 long years, the arena was silent. The death of Commodus did not bring celebration. It brought sobriety. Rome looked at itself and realized something terrifying. It had allowed spectacle to replace leadership. It had traded discipline for entertainment. It had survived not because of its emperor, but in spite of him. Commodus was gone, but the scar remained. His reign became a warning whispered through history, a lesson carved into marble and blood. That power without restraint becomes theater. That authority without responsibility becomes madness. And that when fear is mistaken for love, destruction is inevitable. The Senate tried to restore order. New emperors rose and fell. Laws were rewritten. Traditions were revived. Rome struggled to remember what it once was. But it never fully forgot Commodus, because deep down Rome knew the truth. He was not a monster from birth. He was not a madman alone in the dark. He was the product of absolute power, unchecked ego, and a society willing to applaud as long as it was entertained. The Colosseum still stands today, weathered, silent, immense. And if those stones could speak, they would not tell stories of glory. They would whisper a warning that even the greatest empire on earth can kneel before vanity, that a crown does not make a ruler, and that, sometimes, the fall of an empire begins not with invasion, but with applause. If this story held you until the end, if you felt the tension, the rise, and the fall of Rome's most dangerous emperor, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and watch the next story waiting for you, because history is filled with empires that fell not by the sword. Remember, we are the ones who remember, the ones who question, the ones who refuse to bow to the silence of history. And you, are you ready for the next secret of Rome?